in the last several months and recommended actions that we'd make as a result of that. I'd like to kind of go through the memo that we provided you for your work session tonight, and I'll pause at significant points. Pat and I and Shirley will try to answer any questions that you might have. And of course, feel free to interrupt me anytime during the presentation. So in April of last year, staff became aware of a significant difference between the amount of sewage that was being sent to Kansas City, according to our master meter, and the amount that could be computed by adding up the amounts produced by the city's 9 significant industrial users as recorded by their own individual meters. Our significant industrial users, if that term isn't familiar to you, are 9 of our businesses here in town that, because of their processes, contribute a significant amount of contaminants to the sewer system. And so they have meters which measure those contaminants, and records are kept of their individual contributions, and then they're billed accordingly by us for the contaminants that they contribute to the system. And we, in turn, are billed by the city of Kansas City, and we'll talk a little bit more about that further in the memo. But as you also may recall, last year we were still under a consent order from the U.S. EPA. They did an audit of our system, and they determined that we needed to do some things in terms of our record keeping, in terms of our the contaminants that were being contributed to the system by our significant industrial users. Needed to make some changes to our permits, some changes to our ordinance. We're working on all those things. We're pretty much there, except we were waiting for this one issue to be resolved. So it was actually the EPA, when they were looking at data that we supplied them, that pointed out to us that if you added up all the contributions from our significant industrial users, according to the data that we'd supplied EPA, those amounts exceeded the volume that was being contributed, exceeded the total amount that our master meter was showing as being sent to Kansas City, Missouri. So that didn't make sense. We knew, they said, you've got an issue, you need to resolve this before we can lift you from under this consent order. So we began working to diagnose the issue, and the only thing that we could come up with was that our master meter, which is a magnetic meter, we would call it the mag meter, that measures the volume that passes through the Bedford pump station, was malfunctioning. As you may recall, I hope, we did discuss this with you when we supplied the budget to you last August, and when we had work sessions last September, because we knew at that time that it was likely that we were not recording the total amount that we were contributing in terms of volume to Kansas City, and that we would need to, once we got the mag meter issue resolved, begin paying more. The volumes would start registering as higher, and that would mean higher bills that we would need to pay to Kansas City. At that time, we had no idea of what the significance of that would be, but we do have some idea of it now. We noted that we would probably need to make a substantial budget amendment sometime during the course of this fiscal year. The first thing that we tried to do was have that mag meter cleaned and recalibrated. We did that, and when we did that, it actually registered even less going through. So we knew that wasn't the solution, so at that point we decided we needed to replace the mag meter, which we did. And a new one was installed in October of last year, several months ago. And it immediately began recording volumes that were much, much higher than those we had been recording previously. And the numbers that we're now recording through the mag meter do make sense according to comparing it to what our significant industrial users and others are contributing through the system. So we have diagnosed the problem now, and we have corrected the problem, but then that does lead to an issue with having to pay for higher volumes that we're now contributing to Kansas City system.
Can I ask a question on that, Eric?
Yes, sir.
So on the months that were undercharged or whatever, are we going to have to go back and pay those as well, or is that just water under the bridge and we
They haven't brought that up, and it wasn't my intention to either.
Forget I said anything. Okay.
So, well, we certainly have to going forward, and we know that.
Right.
So, as indicated to you in the numbers that are at the bottom of the memo that was supplied, we are seeing very much significantly higher numbers now. We installed the higher meter, the new meter in the middle of October. We had a bill of $245,000. Our last bill in January was $488,000, nearly 100% higher. Now, some of that is due to another issue, which we will talk about here in the memo and talk about a little bit later, and that is pollutant surcharges. One of our SIUs, Ingredion, is having an issue, and they are contributing a number of more pollutants than they usually do to the system. As a result, they are paying more, but we are paying more. They are working to correct that problem. We've been talking to them, and so we believe that they will be correcting that problem very shortly. But that is partly responsible for the higher numbers, but a lot of it has to do with just higher volumes that have been measured.
Eric, do we have
Yes,
a
sir.
process of monitoring that MAC meter from time to time to see?
Well,
if
we
it's
certainly
performing
now
properly?
recognize the need to do that. I don't think it had never really occurred to us that we should add up the amounts from our SIUs, compare it to the amounts that were going through the MAG meter. The MAG meter, do we know how old it was, Pat, before we replaced it?
Everybody's best guess is it was originally installed when we switched out from being a sewage treatment facility. So
Back in
1987.
So we now recognize the need to replace that on a much shorter schedule.
Hindsight's
And
20/20,
yes, sir.
yeah.
That is something that has been pointed out to us, and we will also be now looking at the data that we take in from SIUs and others and making sure that those numbers make sense with the amounts that are being measured through the MAG meter.
So we had the data, we just weren't using it.
We never recognized the need
Yeah.
to actually check it
Yeah.
in that manner. We assumed that the meter was measuring properly. Kansas City never told us they were seeing an issue. We all were just, and we've looked back at the volume data since the time that we think that the meter started to go bad. And we've looked back at our payments to Kansas City, and there's nothing that drops off a cliff.
Okay.
That would have told us from those numbers, oh gosh, there's something going on here. They went down, but then certain months they have a higher number. There was no pattern that was obvious to us.
Okay.
It really did take this issue with the EPA and the analysts there to show us. But no, the answer is we didn't. Yeah.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
and just one add-on question.
Yeah.
Kansas City doesn't audit the meters or have
It
anybody
is
who
an odd
comes out
system.
to?
It is an odd system that we have, and I think that's something for us to talk to Kansas City about. On the water side, they maintain the meters when we take water from Kansas City, they maintain and look at those meters. And when the meters that we have, that if Kansas City ever takes water from us, we maintain. But not on the sewer side.
Yeah, that's funny, because if
It-
I was Kansas City,
I
I would
agree.
want to know what I'm getting, or what I'm paying, what's being paid to me. And
I agree,
Sure.
and we are actually, because part of what the EPA did require of us was a new sewer ordinance, which we'll be bringing to council shortly, and which has been reviewed and approved by EPA, and also a new sewer contract with Kansas City, which had already expired some time ago, and we've been working off the old agreement. But we, again, have been waiting for this issue to be resolved, but I think that's something for us to talk about. I agree with you. If I were them, I wouldn't,
They have a vested interest.
they certainly do.
And they have a difficulty because Kansas City for quite a while has had trouble with their water department over there in a lot of different areas. And this is just one of them.
But
No.
that is, it is a somewhat strange system where we maintain the meter that they use to measure the numbers that they bill us by. I agree with that.
Right.
Eric, don't we determine the sewer rate for the customer off of their water consumption? I mean, if they use so many gallons of water, isn't our sewer rate?
For our smaller customers, yes.
Oh,
And partially for the larger customers, but for example, at Ingredion, some of the water that they pull from us is put in their product. So it doesn't go into the sewer, and that is deducted from their sewage bill. There,
Well, that-
these significant industrial users that Eric's been speaking about, they don't get billed a sewer bill like you receive at your home. They get a special bill because there's a lot more factors involved in the bill. There can be water drawn out to go into product, water that goes into a cooling tower, sprinkler systems that don't go into the sewer system. So the calculations get adjusted, and even some of the companies have wells that pull water out that we did not produce and use it in their production processes.
I have learned that everything is more complicated when it comes to sewer billing in this city than it was in cities that I've worked in before, because in most cities, you're absolutely right. The sewer usage is determined by the water usage, and then sometimes some cities will have a winter average because people, like during the summertime, will water their yards and things, and that water is not going into the sewer system, so the cities will account for it that way. But in general, it's tied to water usage. But in our city, because of our large industrial base, we have a different system for many of our large users.
I mean, I was thinking, all these new breweries coming to town, I mean, they use the water and they bottle it up and sell it, so it's not going down the drain, and,
Going down someone's drain.
I mean, eventually.
Some of it's going into bottles, I guess. Well,
Just saying.
So do we have an idea now of what percentage of the sewage comes from these SIUs?
I don't know if we know that answer tonight. We can get you an answer
Yeah.
to that one.
Okay.
Yep.
Question, Eric?
Yes, sir.
So, and I understand about there being certain companies with their private wells around town. I don't know how many wells there are, but that's another story in itself. And some of this water, gets put in their products, some in a cooling tower, some wherever. Some of it probably goes down the sewer also. So I'm assuming at each one of these companies, there is a meter showing what is going out to be treated by Kansas City, Missouri.
Yes, for those large users.
My question there is, are they correct? I mean,
Do they, and I'm, Pat, you speak to it, are those meters that we check, or are they reporting their outflow to us?
Right.
I mean, because they're not drawing water from us if they have their own well, so we can't go off of that estimate if they're.
No, we are using their sewer meter as,
But if that one meter was not correct, how do we know that theirs are correct? Or ours are correct, or whoever it belongs to?
I can't answer that very well but I can get the answer.
I think it's a good question, and I think that's something for us to look at, sir. Let us take a look. It's a good question.
Well, this isn't a few dollars.
Right.
That we're talking about.
Well, just as our meter can go bad, so could theirs. I understand your point.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'll just.
Surely.
If their meter was wrong, we would be underbilling them,
Correct.
but the amount we're being billed is determined by our meter.
Well, I think Councilman Farr gets that. He just wants to.
Yeah.
But still, it matters what their meter shows
It does.
as having been, in part because of the pollutants as well. So let us look into that question and get you an answer.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on to a budget amendment that we think will be necessary?
One other question,
Yes,
if they're using water and say like down here at the car wash, and that water, does that go in, that goes into the storm sewers, doesn't it?
Yes,
Or
sir.
is it-
It goes into sanitary sewer system, I believe.
Definitely, it's.
Is that accounted for?
Yes, sir. That's just like the shower, when you take a shower, that goes into the sewer system.
Does the hospital put out an awful lot of wastewater?
I think they do put,
I would think they'd be one of our significant
Yeah.
users.
are they one of our 9 SIUs? They are one of our 9 SIUs.
That's what I thought.
Any other questions we move on to the next item? All right, well, so we, as you can see, we've paid sharply higher charges now to Kansas City since we put the new meter in. And again, we have also noticed much higher pollution surcharges the last few months due to the issue at that one SIU. So we have done our best to try to compute the budget amendment that we think will be necessary to get us through the rest of the fiscal year. And I won't go through all these numbers on the second page of the memo, but we've done our best to try to figure out what a good estimate is. And it is an estimate. No matter how scientific our method is, we still are just estimating, but we've tried to give you what we think is a good estimate, hopefully a number that is if anything, high. A few more months of data will help. We have about 3 months of data. We didn't want to come to you too soon. We wanted to have a few months of data before we came to you with this, but this is our best estimate as of tonight is that it'll take about $1,666,000 extra dollars to get through the rest of the year. I mean, the good news is, if there is good news, we have that in the WPCM fund balance. We went into the year with about a balance that was about 51% of operating expenditures. Our requirement or our policy is 25%. So we had a very healthy balance. But we now would be called upon to eat into it very substantially, and this is our best estimate of what we think would be required and what, if you direct us tonight, we would bring to you at your next meeting for your consideration.
So maybe I missed this,
Yes, ma'am.
but do we bill the SIUs dependent on their readings from their meters, or do we bill them from what Kansas City, Missouri charges us? Because it seems like we should be sitting on their money from their billing there.
Each of our sewer users, each of them, surely you can jump in, but the answer is we do determine what they are contributing. What goes through our meter is what we pay to Kansas City. So
Yeah,
we
but
do
it's-
measure
Okay, so yeah, that's
what
what
they
I
are
understood.
contributing.
So it seems
And
to
then
me
Mr.
like.
Councilman Farr's question was, are we sure that their meters are
Right,
good?
agree, yeah,
Right.
that's a quite valid question, because especially if
Yeah.
you're gonna reconcile back to it, and you have to know that it's the truth when you're reconciling back to it. But my question is, if we're billing them based on their usage from their meters, why aren't we sitting on all that money? Because we have not been sending it to Kansas City. So why don't we have extra money in our fund? Because we haven't been billed for Kansas City what we should have been billed for that period of time.
Councilmember Pierman speaking of volume, not surcharges, though. So she's wondering why, if we're measuring it according to what they contribute to us, even if our number, in other words, well, I mean, that's why we have too many dollars in our system now to some degree. Is
Okay, so
because-
maybe part of it is that.
I mean, that's part of the reason that, yes, we have a nice, healthy balance is because we have been sitting on their dollars to some degree.
Right, okay.
And now, because we are recognizing that we have been and we're getting true charges from Kansas City, we're going to have to start sending those dollars back to Kansas City.
So it's been building over time.
Yes. We had budgeted about $3.3 million for sewer charges to Kansas City in 2018, last year, or in 2017 rather.
2017.
And it was about $2.9 million that we paid to Kansas
Okay,
City.
so we had about 400,000.
Right.
from
We
that.
benefited- Yes. So now we are,
But our usage is going up at the same time. Or not our usage, but the city's usage or volume is going up at the same time.
it's been fairly.
Consistent?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know that we've been experiencing a whole lot of extra usage citywide,
Okay.
but the numbers were showing us to be using less than, in fact, we were.
Thank you.
Sure. So, the next question then is, so now if we eat into the fund balance to the degree that we are recommending to you, what would we need to do in terms of increasing our sewer rate to try to build that balance back up? Before we attempt to do that, we do recommend two savings to you, things that are budgeted in this year's capital budget that we definitely believe we can defer. One is remodeling of our water pollution control building. It is old. If you've been there, it needs it. But on the other hand, given our situation, it is something that can be deferred. So we would definitely recommend not proceeding with that remodeling project this year and waiting a few years until we can build our balance back up to a reasonable level. The other is we have had, as we talked about, I think at the work session when we talked about our infrastructure system, an ongoing inflow infiltration program, which has been focusing lately on sewer lateral lining. We had to try to identify breaks in the system there where storm water is getting into our sanitary sewer system. We could save about $91,000 by pausing that program at this point. So we definitely think those are two things we could do now to improve the fund balance before we consider what kind of a rate increase would be necessary. That would save about $166,000.
The sewer laterals, is that like the laterals, or is that where the connections
That's where
are?
the lateral, the private sewer laterals from homes and others
Homes connect to the sewer
connect to
pipe.
main. Yes, sir. And we have found that there are a number of those cases where at that joint there are breaks in the system which we could eliminate a fair amount of I&I by correcting. But again, that's a long term. That helps us in the long term. But we have a short term issue right now that we
So
think
the
we should.
payout on that would not be, the savings, if we continue to do that, wouldn't be as,
No, sir.
okay.
Not in the short term. Not absolutely not. So
Well, you're talking about delaying the working on the water treatment plant?
not the water treatment plant. No, sir. The WPC, water pollution
Oh,
control
oh,
plant.
oh, okay,
Down,
yeah.
where animal control is down
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
PID.
oh, okay,
Yes,
yeah.
sir. That building. No, we are
Yeah,
full speed
no.
ahead on the water treatment plant. So when we factor that in, it still would show an extremely substantial increase that would need to get us back to the 25% of operating expenditures. That is our goal as a fund balance in each of our funds, except for the general fund where our policy is 50%. We assume that you wouldn't want to increase the rate anything close to that amount in a single year. So what we'd propose is that we work our way back to that where we want to be over a period of years. Not sure exactly how many it might be. We were planning on coming to you around July with our recommendations for water rate increases, sewer rate increases, and we will have more data at that point that could help with a decision like that. But we would work on our assumption would be you'd want to work on a gradual approach, as it is because of Kansas City's anticipated sewer rate increases, which they'll pass on to their customers. That sewer rates are already going to go up at a fairly substantial rate. So we understand that we can't do but so much in any single year to try to get that fund balance back to where we want it to be, but we would propose to get there over a period of years. Any questions about that? All right. Well, the last thing that we wanted to talk to you about that also sort of we realized in the course of analyzing this problem and coming up with solutions has to do with pollutant surcharge fees. So as we've talked a little bit about, we have noticed, because of the problem at one plant in town, a very significant increase in the pollutant surcharge fees that we've been paying to Kansas City, which we would partially recover in surcharge fees that we would charge to Ingredion, but not completely recover. The issue is that we don't charge the same rate for these two pollutants, biochemical oxygen demand and suspended solids, BODs, and suspended solids, as Kansas City charges us. And the reason that we don't was there was a conscious decision made quite a few years ago not to charge that same rate, because what goes through the Bedford pump station is diluted substantially from what we receive from those SIUs. And so if we charge the same rate, we'd be making money off of the pollutants, because we wouldn't be paying as much to Kansas City as they'd be contributing to us. So a decision was made not to, there was a time when the rates were the same, but the decision was made not to increase North Kansas City's rate to meet Kansas City, Missouri's rate to us. And that's been going on for quite some time, to the point now where it is, again, out of whack, where we have too low a rate. We are not recovering from our significant industrial users what they are contributing to the system and what we are paying to Kansas City. On the last page of the memo, we show you what Kansas City's rates are to us and what our rates are to our SIUs. And as you can see, they're significantly lower. In the case of the BODs, less than 50% of Kansas City's rate. In the case of suspended solids, a little bit more than Kansas City's rate, but much, much lower than theirs. And so we do believe that it would be wise to immediately, or as soon as possible, increase those rates. And what we are proposing is to split the difference between our current rates and what Kansas City is currently charging. So we list the rates here in our memo that we would recommend to you. Even those probably wouldn't fully recover, but we want to try to be fair to the SIUs. And also, it's a little hard to compare because the monthly charges are so different. So we'd like to look at this each year and gradually get our rate to where it ought to be so that we are fully recovering what we would send to Kansas City. And that would mean that we wouldn't charge the entire rate that Kansas City's charging us, but probably a little bit more than we're recommending that we move up to this year. But we do recommend it's a fairly substantial increase to get us closer to where we need to be. And then keep an eye on it and work towards 100% recovery in the future.
So do we have a way of measuring that now? What's coming out of the SIU? How much of this suspended solids or biochemical oxygen demand? I mean, are we testing that? Are we?
Yes.
Is there like density checks on this?
The problem is that it varies from month to month, and so it's
Yeah.
hard to come up with an exact number that we ought to hit to exactly reach that 100% recovery level.
Okay.
So, again, I mean, that's Shirley has explained the difficulties to me. It's just not as easy as like, well, here's what it is, here's what it needs to be. You know, it's not a simple mathematical formula to be able to determine that. But
I mean, do we have a general idea though, maybe on a previous month, how many pounds we're talking? I mean, because
we have the data.
okay. 'Cause, I mean, just seeing the 40 cents versus 20 cents, but not knowing how many total. I mean, what the number is we're actually looking at.
We could tell you what it should be in any given month, but we're
Okay.
not sure what it ought to be over a longer
Yeah,
period.
yeah. Okay.
But over again, with the benefit of additional data, we think we can get there.
Okay.
We're just not sure we could give you a number tonight, and that's why we're coming up with a number that's roughly halfway in between as an interim number that we would recommend to you.
Yeah, I have what they put into the system, just metered. Maybe they're meters, but it's metered.
Right. Yes, sir.
They should pay for what they put in. I mean, if you look at the Fairway, now I know it'd be a big increase for them, but they're producing that and they're pumping in. Now, take the residents, for example. Now, we pay a lot less because we're not putting that much in. We at least pay for every drop of water goes on our sewer bill, where theirs don't. So I think whatever they do put in the system is what I'm getting at, they ought to pay for it by what we're charged by Kansas City.
So you would propose then that we charge exactly the same rate as Kansas City?
Exactly.
Well, from what now I may be wrong, but from what I was able to gather, several cities, our comp formula looks pretty simple compared to other cities. They have all the density and everything. I mean, it kind of, I'm sure it ends up being close, but Riverside showed they charge equal to what Kansas City was charging. That's the way it was written in the ordinance, at least.
And an argument could be made that that's a reasonable. Certainly, it makes it easy. We simply, whenever they raise the rate to us each year, we increase it to that amount. It does allow us to save for other things like capital projects that we need to do on the sewer side. So, I mean, if the council is amenable to that, certainly staff is too.
What's the
That
negative?
is the reason that we didn't do it before, but a decision was made, and I don't know if it was made at the council level, that we didn't want to overcharge. But given our current situation, if you all decided that that was something that was appropriate, we wouldn't object at all.
Certainly be a simple answer to the problem.
It would be, but it would be a significant amount increase to.
But it's
Agree
be
on.
fair, when Harris found out they was overpaying us from that tax on their profits, they wanted that money back, and we gave it back to them. Fair is fair. We charged them too much. We're charging too little in this case.
That's right.
I mean, yeah, it's going to increase their bill significantly, but it'd make it fair. I mean, you're putting this in, you got to pay for it. At one time, and I was back when I was an employee, but legal counsel, they's talking about, the city got way behind on the water bills to even the residents. I mean, it's today, it is monthly what it used to be for 3 months, you know. And the legal counsel says, the state says, you can't subsidize the utilities. They had to pay for it themselves, is what he told us.
Yes or no, that's correct.
And so they're not paying for what they're putting in. And I'm not mad about it or anything. I just saying, hey, fair is fair.
So what would,
As we've looked at, as we've looked back at the past, when Pat and I have talked about this, and we have one employee who's been with us a very long time in water pollution control, so he's sort of our institutional memory. His best memory was that the city thought there might be a Hancock issue, the Hancock Amendment issue, because just as you say, we can't subsidize, neither are we allowed to charge more for services than we are having to spend to provide them. So I think there might have been some thought at the time. But I have to say, I think it would be quite defensible to charge the same rate that Kansas City charges us, and simply say that that's.
But doesn't that sound fair?
Well, but
what's the
I think
downside to it?
This is not
What would be
this is
the
not mom and
downside
pop
to it?
shops that's going to close down on the county.
Right.
More of a public
Supposedly, somebody
relations-
might challenge that as being higher than it by rights should be.
Well, how could they possibly do that, though?
but
Again, having to do with the dilution of the system and the fact that we're not paying the same amount to Kansas City as we would be charging them. That would be the,
But we're the ones,
just to answer your question.
Like we're using it as a profit center.
but we're the ones diluting their product or their waste. So,
No,
but anyway, that's my opinion that it ought to be
That's-
charged
I
whatever the
wouldn't
rate.
have any trouble with that.
Well, then if the next step would be, we do need to have a public hearing, and they would have the opportunity, by the way, and they'd get notice of it, and we'd make sure they were aware of it. If they want to come and argue that that rate shouldn't be that amount, they'd have that opportunity. But
Well,
we
you
could
know they'll have that
certainly
argument,
notice
yeah.
up a public hearing with those proposed rates and take it from there. Take public comment.
I mean, I would be fine with something even if it can a little less than, because I do understand that a little bit, that it does probably get diluted going through. But this, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but this difference looks to be a little.
Oh,
like
it's
you said,
definitely.
yeah, it's
It's not.
Yeah,
This is way too.
not even
Yeah, we
close.
need to get
yeah.
to 100% recovery by whatever method you might decide. It needs to be much higher than it is, no
Yeah.
question. We have let it go for way too long.
Can you come back with some numbers to show about how much it's going to increase these people before we make the final decision?
We'll do our best to give you some numbers based upon the usage that we've seen, and we can do we can at least do that. Tell you what their bill was in a given month and what it would have been if we had charged the Kansas City rate. We can do that, yes, sir. So that would be one of the pieces of direction that we're looking for tonight. Shall we call a public hearing on these surcharge rates, and for April 17th, it does require 30 days notice for it. That's by statute, any change to sewer rates. And as we work towards that date, we can work to give you some of that information. Yes, sir.
This will draw attention to the problem, and maybe we'll come to some resolve that's maybe a little bit, we're going to maybe have to compromise, maybe, see what happens.
Yes, sir. We will plan in that manner then. We will plan to notice up a public hearing at which we propose to increase the rates to the amounts that Kansas City is now currently charging us. Actually, we have received their new rate as of May 1st. So that's the rate that we would propose, then, based upon your direction tonight.
Sounds good.
Also, to bring you a budget amendment at your next meeting for the volume change. So I'm sorry that this isn't a good news work session, but that's the situation we see ourselves in. Any other
Next
questions that
time,
we
save
can
us
answer?
money.
I'm sorry, sir?
Next time, bring us something that saves us money.
I'll see what I can do, sir.
The next 10 times.
Any other questions for you or any other discussion?
To adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
You know this wall.